Leopold II was born in 1835 in Brussels, the son of King Leopold I. He ascended the throne in 1865 and ruled until his death in 1909. Although he was the king of a small country, he harbored the ambition to build his own colonial empire, aiming to elevate Belgium to the status of a great power equal to Britain and France. The Congo, a personal empire of Leopold II. In 1885, under the lofty banners of civilizing Africa and abolishing the slave trade, King Leopold II of Belgium achieved what no other European monarch had ever done: he became the sole private owner of an entire country. Through masterful diplomacy, deception, and self-promotion, he persuaded the Berlin Conference, a gathering of the great colonial powers of Europe, to recognize his claim over a vast territory in Central Africa. This region would soon be known to the world as the Congo Free State. Yet it was not free, nor was it truly a state. It was the personal property of one man, held not in the name of Belgium, but in the name of Leopold himself. Leopold presented his colonial ambition as a noble humanitarian mission. To the diplomats in Berlin, he spoke of establishing scientific stations, bringing Christianity, and suppressing the Arab slave trade that ravaged the interior of Africa. He promised to open the heart of the continent to commerce, progress, and enlightenment. Behind closed doors, however, the king's motivations were entirely self-serving. He saw in the Congo a chance to gain wealth, prestige, and geopolitical power for himself, bypassing Belgium's parliament and public opinion. The African territory, an area 80 times the size of his small European kingdom, became, in his own words, his magnificent private enterprise. A private empire concealed as philanthropy. Leopold II's cunning lay in his ability to disguise greed as benevolence. He created a web of front organizations such as the International African Association and the International Congo Society, both ostensibly scientific and humanitarian institutions. These societies were, in truth, nothing more than shell corporations serving the king's ambitions. With the help of the famous explorer Henry Morton Stanley, he secured hundreds of treaties from local chiefs who, often without understanding the documents they signed, ceded their land and sovereignty in exchange for trinkets and cloth. When the European powers gathered in Berlin between 1884 and 1885, Leopold's representatives presented him as a selfless benefactor. He claimed he sought no personal gain and that the Congo would be an open territory for free trade among all nations. Seduced by his rhetoric, and relieved to avoid direct confrontation over African borders, the major powers formally recognized Leopold's personal control. Thus, by international law, the Congo Free State was born, not as a colony of Belgium, but as the private estate of King Leopold II. A kingdom of exploitation. Once he had secured ownership, Leopold wasted no time transforming the Congo into what many historians now describe as the largest forced labor camp on earth. He ruled from Brussels but operated through a ruthless colonial administration of European officers and African intermediaries. The new king proprietor divided the land into concessions, granting monopoly rights to private companies that he himself controlled or profited from. The most infamous of these were the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company, ABR, and the Société Anversoise. The Congo's rainforests contained an abundance of wild rubber vines, a commodity that, by the 1890s, had become extraordinarily valuable due to the global boom in bicycle tires, industrial belts, and, soon, automobiles. Ivory was another prize. Prized tusks from elephants were shipped in bulk to Europe, feeding the insatiable demand for piano keys, billiard balls, and fine ornaments. Leopold saw these riches not as the shared wealth of a nation, but as the yield of his personal plantation. Every ton of rubber or ivory extracted from the jungle meant more gold flowing into his royal coffers. The machinery of terror. To enforce his system of extraction, Leopold established a private military force, the Force Publique, composed of European officers and tens of thousands of conscripted African soldiers. Their mission was simple: compel the population to meet the rubber quotas by any means necessary. Villages that failed to collect enough rubber faced collective punishment, hostages were taken, homes were burned, and entire communities were annihilated. The Force Publique became notorious for its cruelty. Soldiers were ordered to present severed hands of victims as proof that their bullets had not been wasted. This grotesque practice gave rise to one of the most chilling symbols of the era, the hand tax. Under this regime of fear, millions of Congolese were enslaved, mutilated, or killed. Families were torn apart, men were forced into the forests to gather rubber, while women and children were held hostage until they returned with the required amounts. Disease, exhaustion, and starvation spread rapidly as villages were emptied and agricultural life collapsed. Missionaries, traders, and travelers who ventured into the interior described scenes of desolation, towns reduced to ashes, corpses lining riverbanks, and survivors branded or mutilated as punishment. By the turn of the 20th century, reports of atrocities began to leak out, shocking the conscience of the world. Yet, for decades, Leopold II continued to deny responsibility, insisting that he was a philanthropist who had brought civilization to a savage land. In reality, his personal fortune was built upon one of the most brutal exploitation systems in human history. A fortune drenched in blood. The profits from the Congo were staggering. Contemporary estimates suggest that Leopold II personally accumulated hundreds of millions of francs, equivalent to billions in today's currency. These riches were used to finance grand architectural projects in Belgium, the Royal Galleries of Ostend, the Avenue Louise, the Royal Greenhouses of Laeken, and the Palais de Justice in Brussels. Belgians admired their monarch's vision, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that these symbols of progress were constructed with blood money extracted from African suffering. Meanwhile, in the Congo, the human cost was immeasurable. Historians estimate that between 10 and 15 million Congolese people, roughly half the population, perished between 1885 and 1908 due to killings, starvation, and disease linked to Leopold's rule. Entire ethnic groups vanished, ancient cultures disintegrated, and vast regions of the Congo basin were depopulated. What had once been a land of thriving communities became a haunted wilderness. Exposure and reckoning. The global campaign to expose Leopold's crimes gained momentum in the early 1900s. Missionaries such as George Washington Williams, E.D. Morel, and Roger Casement published damning reports documenting the horror. Photographs of mutilated Congolese men, women, and children circulated in newspapers, challenging the propaganda that had portrayed the Congo Free State as a beacon of civilization. The Congo Reform Association mobilized international outrage, making the Congo question one of the first great human rights movements of the modern era. Cornered by mounting pressure, Leopold II finally agreed in 1908 to relinquish his personal control. The Congo Free State was formally annexed by the Belgian government, becoming the Belgian Congo. Yet the damage was irreversible. The legacy of violence, exploitation, and trauma would echo across generations, shaping the political and social fabric of Central Africa for the century to come. The illusion of progress. Leopold II's defenders often argue that his reign laid the foundations of modern Congo, introducing railways, ports, and administrative systems. But these developments were designed solely to serve extraction, not uplift the people. Roads were built to transport ivory and rubber, not to connect communities. Education was minimal, limited to producing clerks and servants for the colonial apparatus. Medicine served the goal of maintaining a productive labor force, not of improving public health. The king's self-proclaimed civilizing mission was, in truth, a smokescreen, a calculated performance to secure international legitimacy while concealing crimes of extraordinary scale. In private correspondence, Leopold himself dismissed humanitarian ideals, referring to Africans as lazy savages, and the Congo as a pie to carve. His letters reveal a man consumed by greed, yet obsessed with maintaining the facade of moral purpose. A shadow that endures. By the time of his death in 1909, Leopold II was one of the wealthiest monarchs in Europe. Yet he died despised by many and cursed by history. When his funeral procession passed through the streets of Brussels, crowds reportedly turned their backs in silence, a symbolic gesture of national shame. The Congo Free State had brought Belgium global recognition, but at a price measured in millions of African lives. Today, historians view Leopold's ownership of the Congo as a chilling precedent, a warning of how absolute power and unchecked ambition can turn philanthropy into tyranny. The Congo was not merely a colony, it was a mirror reflecting the darkest impulses of imperialism, the hunger for profit disguised as progress, the conquest of people justified as civilization, and the transformation of an entire land into a private empire built upon human suffering. In Belgium, King Leopold II was long celebrated as the Builder King. His reign left behind grand monuments, opulent palaces, elegant boulevards, and sprawling parks that reshaped the face of Brussels and other Belgian cities. He commissioned the Royal Galleries of Ostend, the Parc du Cinquantenaire, and the Avenue Louise, transforming Belgium into a country of architectural splendor and European sophistication. For decades, schoolbooks praised him as a visionary monarch, a symbol of progress, culture, and national pride. Yet, behind the polished marble and gilded halls lay a truth so monstrous that it has forever tainted his legacy. While Belgians admired the beauty of their modernized cities, the blood of millions of Congolese men, women, and children had paid for those stones. The wealth that financed Belgium's golden age was extracted through murder, enslavement, and terror in the Congo Free State, Leopold's personal empire of suffering. To the world, Leopold II is remembered not as a builder, but as a destroyer of lives, a man whose pursuit of wealth turned an entire nation into a graveyard. Historians and human rights scholars often call him the Hitler of Africa, a title that reflects not ideology, but the scale of devastation he wrought. Under his rule, from 1885 to 1908, an estimated 10 to 15 million Congolese perished through forced labor, starvation, disease, and systematic violence. Entire communities were wiped from the map. Families were mutilated, children orphaned, and ancient tribal structures shattered beyond repair. Leopold cloaked his empire in the rhetoric of civilization and Christian duty, proclaiming that he was bringing light to the dark continent. In truth, he unleashed darkness upon it. The so-called civilizing mission was nothing more than a mask for greed, a calculated facade that allowed Europe to look away while one man turned Africa's heartland into his private killing field. He spoke of ending the slave trade, yet built a system of slavery far more efficient and deadly than any before it. When the truth finally emerged, Belgium's pride turned to shame. By the mid-20th century, as global awareness of colonial atrocities deepened, Leopold's reputation began to crumble. The grand statues erected in his honor became symbols of denial and hypocrisy. In recent decades, protesters have defaced or removed many of these monuments, demanding that Belgium confront the horror it long suppressed. The debate continues today, between those who still see Leopold as a national modernizer and those who insist he be remembered as a mass murderer in royal robes. His story stands as a grim reminder that civilization can coexist with cruelty, and that progress built on oppression is no progress at all. The Congo's suffering funded Europe's elegance, and beneath the beauty of Leopold's architecture lies the echo of screams from a continent he claimed to save. More than a century after his death in 1909, Leopold II's name remains a stain on human history, a symbol of how unchecked ambition and moral blindness can turn a king into a tyrant, and a nation's pride into a legacy of blood.